Blog Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to another webcast from the Kentucky Water Fuel Museum. The date is April 1st, but this is not April Fool's Day because we are here to combat such foolishness with accurate knowledge about alternative energy technology. So with us for the second time is the renowned inventor and industrial troubleshooter, Stephen Meyer. Stephen, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Is that an accurate description of your job title? Are you a sort of a troubleshooter?
You know, it's interesting that you point that out because I've always felt, at least in my professional position and career, that I like to solve problems. I'm a problem solver, and I realized that in my young engineering days out of school, I had the attitude, I didn't care about money, just tell me what problem you needed to get solved, and I'll go do it.
Well,
and I do that today, you know. And
the money should follow. If you're helping people solve problems that are costing them a great deal of money, because they are, usually these problems have to do with efficiency of systems, don't they? They do.
If you got a problem, the most important thing to do is to find that problem. And so some of the techniques are really important. Like, example, what I do is I just take a sheet of paper and I crease it in half vertically, and then I write on the left side of it. I always write down what I know. And you can't start with what you don't know, but you can start with what you know. And then after you start writing that down, and then pretty soon you start to realize what you don't know. And that technique will take you into areas where you can solve your problem then.
And, you know, I think that's a major part of the reason why there aren't more solutions to the world's energy problems forthcoming from the general population, because that left side of the paper is blank. We've been kept in the dark, either through our own complacency or through, the lack of education. And many people have asked, why aren't the school systems, both in the public school systems and then the higher education, why aren't they teaching the kind of things that we've been discussing on this program, and that you pretty much have to do a web search knowing what you're looking for to find, you know? Why isn't academia teaching these kinds of subjects?
Well, the way I see it is that I took a survey when I was in 1973. I graduated out of college, and I had been in academia for a long time as a student, and what is happening is in 1973 I took a survey and I realized that my son would have to read 18 books for every book that I read because of the exponential rate at which knowledge is exploding. Now, to extrapolate that out to today, a student would have to probably read, I'm just going to take a shot in the dark, probably about 100 or so books for every book that I read. So the information, the more people that are on the planet, the more people that are becoming educated are contributing to this. And what's happening in the schools is that they can only talk about snippets of things rather than really getting into those things. So what happens is the kids go through kindergarten and they mature, and they have to, the education system knows how and when and what to teach these kids. But by the time they get through high school, the kids say, well, gee, I'm set for life. But in reality, they're just getting started. All they've really done is told them where the library is, where to get the information. And now the kids have to say, well, what am I going to do? And then get in there and research it, go to college, and then they get their BS, and they get their master's degree, and then now they get their PhD degree, and then beyond that they get their fellowships. And so that's when they mature and decide what subject they want to really get into, you know. So education right now it's just snippets, and the kids don't realize that they're getting all of this information in just a little bit of a picture, if you will, of what it is, but they've got to make a decision to pick something out and just dig into it, and then they become experts. So.
Well, speaking of kids and their development, in order for them to become inventors, such as you and your brother are, You had told me a year ago that you and your brother were very much hands-on type tinkerers as children. In other words, you built, I guess your family was of limited resources, and so you built a lot of your own toys and whatnot?
We did. It was kind of extraordinary. My dad was a very gentle man, and he fostered a lot of our creativity because he could have, slapped our hands and said, "Don't do this," but he was always showing us what we can do. There was a time when Stan and I were doing work during the summer, and my dad would say, "Come on, boys, it's after breakfast, go out and you got to do something." And we'd have to either go pick fruit off the trees or rake the yard or cut the grass. And so every day he would tell us, he'd say, "Come on, boys, it's not your birthday. Get out there and do some work." So our birthday came up in August 24th, and Stan and I decided that when we went to bed that night, we were not going to do anything on our birthday. So we got up in the morning, and Dad came in and said, "Come on, boys, I want you to go out and paint the swing on the front porch." And we said, "Nope, we're not going to do that." Mom came in and says, "Come on, boys, have your breakfast and go out on the front porch and paint the swings." And we said, "Nope, we're not going to do that." And finally, they got kind of upset with us, and so we protested, and we had our breakfast. And so Stan and I went back and got our paint cans and paintbrushes and walked around the side of the house to the front of the house and coming up the steps to paint the swing. And we were just absolutely livid about having to work on a birthday. And lo and behold, here was these brand new Swin bicycles, chrome fenders and handlebars, and just absolutely gorgeous bicycles. And if I had been my parents at that time, I would have said, "No way, you kids aren't getting any bicycles."
Yeah.
But Dad said, "Okay, ride your bicycles down the end of the street and bring them back." So we did that. And then when we brought them back, he says, "Okay, tear it all apart." And we were shocked. "What do you mean tear it apart?" "Well, no, tear it all apart." He said, and every last bolt and nut and so forth. And then he showed us how to put it all back together. And then when he got all done, he says, "Now, boys," he says, "let this be a lesson to you." He says, "You take care of those bicycles now. I know you can do it." That's just the way he was. And so we did. We built our own stuff, and then we learned how to appreciate things, too.
Yeah, well, that's an important lesson in starting on a path of being a mechanic. And you told me that you had also built other types of toys or model airplanes, so on.
We did. Stan and I really went through. We went through the gamut of crystal radios. It was kind of interesting too, because when we were kids, it was coming out of the war years, and everything was vacuum tube. And I always thought it was kind of interesting because we would wind coils around blocks of wood, and then get a crystal. And they had these germanium crystals at the time, and they were point contact type devices. And we'd go down and get earphones and put them on, and then I would adjust that cat whisker on that germanium rock. It just looked like a rock, and then you could hear the sound. And I thought, boy, that is kind of neat. And I was puzzled over the big vacuum tube radios that we had, that this little cat whisker type device would work and pick up the sound. And that was a forerunner of the transistor technology.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Now, going on to the present, I mean, we were talking about a span of many, many years, but I would say that the early interest that young people have in such things contributes to their confidence in being able to build devices as they get older. And I think that's missing in the young generation of today.
I don't know. I look at some of these kids and some of these toys, and I like to pick them up and see what they're doing. And some of these new toys are just fabulous. I look at the future because of the way the toys are built and what they are. And when I see these robots and transformer units and things, that's what the future is. You know that when we were kids, and it's true today, when we read comics books and we had funny paper comics, and Do you know that 80% of all those comic strips have come true? I mean, I used to read about Dick Tracy wristwatch and video phones and Captain Video ray guns and power packs and Captain Marvel and those things. All of those things basically have come true. And what I think's happened is that the kids read those comic books and they don't have any education. They don't have that resistance to it. They just look at it and say, boy, it'd be kind of neat. And then some way, randomly, as they grow up and get older and get educated, then somehow those devices come about. So they're all here. We've got lasers and we've got jet power packs and things of that nature, and it's just incredible.
It is quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So
well,
it's
it would seem that science fiction can actually be a more accurate predictor of technology than the mainstream media. It seems.
Well, I think so. I mean, look at Captain Kirk and Beam Me Up Scotty and the transporters and the tricorders and all of that will be here. There was when I was a kid, there was a magazine. I think it was Life magazine, and they came out with all of these artist concepts of spacemen. They had vehicles in space. They had spacemen with suits, and it was just incredible. And I took that magazine and I cut it all up and pasted everything on my wall in my bedroom. And I said, I want to be one of these things, whatever it is, like an astronaut. And it was a goal of mine. And unfortunately, I had a next-door neighbor that had worked for the post office, and I was talking to him one day about becoming an astronaut, and he said, well, son, he says, they'll never get to the moon in your lifetime. And so I went up and took them all down and said, why am I wasting my time? And here it is. Of course, here it is today. They went to the moon. Armstrong went to the moon.
Isn't that something?
And he was approximately my age when he did it. So, don't believe the guy next door.
Yeah, well, no doubt that there is a lot of discouragement that most successful inventors will repeat what you just said. Don't believe such people. I know Henry Ford's, some of his quotes are quite popular along that line. And we would certainly say that's true about running vehicles on water fuel, which is the main thrust of this program.
Sure.
I've had plenty of people tell me that it's a fantasy, that it violates the laws of the universe, that you can't.
My goodness.
To overcome the bonds, it takes more energy than what you get out of the gases that result.
Egads. Well, maybe I can shed some light on it tonight. I start looking at the things we've been doing, and one of the things that really pops out from your show when you started years ago with your museum and things, that you never really have anything that works. That's been the big problem, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing that I didn't have any working devices there. In fact, somebody even warned me, I think it was you, not to have a working device there, which I took as being good advice, because a messenger of a technology is in a different class than someone who's actually parading around a working device saying, here it is. And
that's true.
I felt
I agree
safer doing this. No one had ever done this before. There had never been a museum that told the history of water fuel technology. I think maybe the Tesla Museum at one time that existed in Colorado may have had something about it, but mine was the first museum to ever say, these are the facts about this technology. It goes back all the way to the first vehicle that had an internal combustion engine. And why is it the Henry Ford Museum doesn't admit this, Why is it Switzerland wasn't celebrating the 200th anniversary of the internal combustion engine automobile in 2005? Instead, I was. There's nothing on the internet from Switzerland celebrating their native son's invention of the internal combustion engine automobile that ran on hydrogen.
Yeah, it's a shame. But what happens, I think, a lot of times is that the technology, you get a lot of different things that appear along the way, and then people pick and choose the ones they kind of like and the ones that work. Like my dad, for example, and he was born in 1910, and my dad, his high tech was the automobile. And when I was 15 years old, my dad said, Steve, how much money do you have? And I said, well, I got a little bit of money, Dad. I've been carrying papers and so forth. And he says, well, come on, we're going to go down and buy you a car. Well, 15, boy, that was pretty exciting. So he liked, for some reason, he liked the Chevrolet two-door sports coupe. And it was a very heavy car. It was very heavy gauge steel and so forth, but that's what he liked. And we went down, we bought one, and we brought it home and put it in the garage. And then Dad says, okay, son, tear it apart.
That's great.
You got 1 year to get it done and get it fixed and get it repaired, because it was 16. You could only drive when you were 16. So I did that. We tore that car all the way down to every bolt, and everything that was rotating, moving, we replaced, repaired, or refurbished. And I remember placing all the parts of that engine on we had built a table and put the parts of the engine on the table as we tore them apart, and it looked like 300 parts or whatever they were. But to me, that was like, Dad, we're never going to get this thing all back together. I said, this is incredible. And Dad said, no, come on. So he showed me how to overhaul that engine in that car, and so by 16, we had it all back together and even painted it. It was just cream puff when we were done. Well, when we put the engine back in there, and Dad was getting the engine ready to start and run, he asked me, he says, Steve, he says, now what I want you to do is when you go in there, I want you to step on the starter, and I want you to look at the fan blade of this motor, and you just tell me how many revolutions it makes before the motor starts. And I said, well, okay, Dad. And it had a floor starter where you just push on the floor. There's a button, you push on it. It would engage the starter, and that motor started turning over. And that blade never moved more than a quarter of its rotation. That engine was running. And I got out of the car, and I couldn't hear the car. I said, Dad, is the car running? And I said, there's no way this car could run like that. And he says, oh, yeah. And so he put a glass of fuel. He had a glass and put some fuel in it and put it on top of the carburetor. And he said, now look at that, son. He says, you see those ripples in that? And I said, yeah. He says, now watch this. And then he would tune it up. And he tuned that car up where those ripples would disappear or diminish. When he was all said and done, that car ran beautiful. And he told me, I said, Dad, it's like running like a watch. And he said, son, he says, in my day, the cars were very unreliable, absolutely unreliable. They had the small tire, balloon tires and so forth, and they rattled and broke down. And he says, in our day, what we did was did everything we could to make them run good and quiet. And the moral of that story was that my dad asked me to give my twin brother Stan my car, and I was hesitant to do so, but finally drove around the block one time and came in and gave him the keys and said, there you are. And then my dad promised me he'd buy me another car, and it was summertime, and I was 16, and I wanted to drive a car, and he was a little slow in getting that. So I went down and bought a 49 Ford flathead, V8 flathead Ford, and I was kind of nervous bringing it home, but I did. And then finally my dad looked at it and said, well, son, he says, I see you got a Ford. And I said, yeah, I did. He says, well, I'm never going to drive it. He said, don't ever ask me to ride in it. I goes, whoa, sorry, Dad. Okay. And then I found out the story that he really blamed the recession on Ford. Ford had started producing cars, and then he was paying outlandish salaries to his people so he could buy the cars and keep the plant going, and my dad blamed him for that. So I guess that's why he was a Chevy man.
Interesting. Well,
but the case in point there is that my dad, when he showed me about that engine, we got all done, and I asked Dad, I said, Dad, what's the energy driving the car? And he says, well, son, he says, it's the gasoline, and you set up the carburetor for a 15-to-1 stoichiometric ratio and so forth and so forth. And then when he got done, I'd ask him again. I said, Dad, where's the energy coming from that drives this car? I mean, how's it really work? And he said, well, it uses a spark plug and it fires and does this. Well, I soon realized that he was telling me the best way he knew that how this car runs, how the fuel runs. But nobody at the time could really answer my question. And even through high school, when I went to chemistry class and things, I would ask them, where was the energy coming from? And I was starting to get little snippets from people of what they thought was happening in the cars. So that's where I got my interest on why and how cars run, where the energy is coming from.
Okay, let's get back to that matter of the conventional wisdom dictating that you cannot improve upon the efficiency of the decomposition reaction, I guess you call it. There's the consensus.
In what way? In what mode? What way? Well, tell me how you're looking at it.
Well, in other words, they're saying that you can do anything you want to try to do. And in fact, the head of the American Hydrogen Association, Warren McAllister, told me this. He said,
McAllister? Oh, jeez.
Yeah, he's in Arizona. And he said, I'm willing to look at anything you come up with. Anything anyone comes up with, I'm willing to look at it. But I have never seen, and I tell my students, and I've challenged them. He says, I've never seen anyone ever produce hydrogen and oxygen from water with an efficiency greater than, I guess, 100%. That's what he was saying.
Oh, well, that's a safe thing to say. You know, I mean, that's true. When you look at 100%, but then you have to go back and, well, what are you gauging? What is your 100% level? When developing technology and you're looking at, how can I explain? Okay. The way I look at these things is not as a component. I have to look at it as a complete system. And so what I've been doing is going through, looking at all of the components and the whole rather than the parts. And then I start to understand what the parts are, and then I try to understand what kind of improvements that could be made and might be made and things of that nature. So, you know, and that's what Stan did. Is we started off, he started off looking back back in 73 and 74. You know, Hubert's Peak was a very interesting book. If you get a chance, you should read it, because Hubert was a professor, and he was studying things about how many oil fields were being drilled, and then how many there were, and how much fuel we were using, and the rate of it, and so forth. And he realized that the United States was running into a problem, because as the cars became more and more popular, it's not that the American people are addicted to oil. It's the fact that the American people love their cars, and it's the freedom of the cars that excited the young people and the old people in the United States. But Hubert was doing some calculations, and he set up an algorithm, and he plotted his bell-shaped curve, and he noted that, wow, man, we're going to have a problem. And so in my graduating class from college, it was kind of interesting, because we went down to the Coliseum, and our speaker was from Ashland Oil. He was the president of Ashland Oil at the time. And during his delivery of the commencement, he said that what's coming up in the next couple of years is a real problem. And being brand new students, we could care less. All we want to do is throw our hats in the air and get the heck out of there. But later on, as I started thinking about what he was saying, he was trying to tell us that the oil embargo and that the United States is running out of oil. So the oil embargo occurred. The people had a knee-jerk reaction and saw what the problems were, and then a lot of people said, "What can we do? What can we do?" So they took off and tried to do some things, and then what they did was the United States made a decision to buy oil out of the country, and they did, and they went over to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia, they found a lot of oil. It was American engineers that found the oil over in Saudi Arabia. They wanted water, and they kept coming back with oil. So then they realized that, okay, the United States and the other countries of the world could get this flow of oil, and so they started shipping it to the United States. And of course, we bought the product, and we're driving the cars. Well, last November, there was another a scientist that was doing the same thing as Hubert's Peak, and he says, "Whoa!" Last year, in October, November, he concluded the same conclusion that the world is running out of oil, and we're going sliding downhill. The American people are still buying the products in the cars because they need to. I mean, you can't. How do you get to work and so forth without your vehicle? And the problem is, too, is that if you're running out of oil, we can't get the oil to the United States as fast as we used to. In other words, if you look at the number of boats and the volume of oil that they're bringing across the Atlantic into the United States and around the world, they can't bring them in fast enough to keep up with our consumption. So we're back in the same situation right now that people are starting to look at it and say, well, now we got to what can we do? Plus, we have this realization of this global warming and the problems occurring, and the discussion's over with. You know, the people with our television and our communications and things of that nature see that the Earth is we're in trouble. So we got to make a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift, and it's going to take everybody. One contribution here, another contribution there, and finally somebody's going to hit on something, and people are going to collectively get together, and they're going to make it happen. This thing about water is very interesting to me because when Stan got involved with it, he saw a need back in '73 and '74, and some of the first things he did when he put together his cell, I remember Charlie Holbrook and Stan said, I can do something like that, and he went back and fashioned his first cell, and he went and he started running a small engine, and they ran it. He didn't care how efficient it was and so forth. It ran. Everybody, they just marveled at it.
Now, what was the style of that cell? Was it tubes or was it plates or what?
Stan went through the whole gamut of designs, and he started off with plates, and I marveled at the number of configurations that he designed, put together to see what these events were, what was happening. He had one that I marveled at because it was the two vertical plates that it was set up so that you could move the plates and make the gap either bigger or smaller. And he adjusted these things. They were so high, I don't know, but maybe 2 feet high. And he adjusted these plates, and then I could see where the plates were adjusted out, where you could see this small ribbon. It was kind of an interesting ribbon of flow right in the middle. And I marveled at that because I could see it with my human eye, with the eyes.
In other words, it was a chamber that you could look down in and see the electrolyte in between the two plates.
Yeah, you could not look down it, you could look through it.
It had plexiglass sidewalls?
That's correct. Oh, yeah, he used plexiglass tubing and stuff so you could see these.
So you're mentioning a phenomenon that others have commented on, too, and that is that there is something that happens between two plates. There's some kind of electromagnetic field that causes is it a chemical reaction?
Well, that's what I want to bring out, and I mentioned the last time that we were on the air, and this is the inventors that are inventing these products, and when I read the patents and see what they're doing, I get very interested, and what I'm indicating by that is that you have to define and think about what it is that you're doing. And maybe you don't know why you're doing it, but you got this gut feeling that you're doing it. And then when you do it, you want to sit down and look at it and think about it, and then say, where am I going with this thing, and is it worth it? And what? And the biggest question is, you write down what you know about it, and then all of a sudden you know what you don't know. And when you find that out, go out and research it and come back and take a look at it. And You know, when I was in high school, I was introduced to electrolysis process, and you know, it was 15, 20 minutes. You get a beaker, you put some water in it, and then you put in 25 or 20% of some electrolyte solution. You could pick it out and put it in, and then today they have I think it's about 8 or 9 products that they can put in for electrolytes. And the interesting thing about the electrolytes is that they all have a voltage, which you call the decomposition voltage, and that voltage ranges from like 0.98 up to 2.1 volts or something like that. But it's if you study the atoms and you study the molecules of that product, that's what it is. That's when you look at a cell in an automobile battery, for example. If you have a 12-volt battery, you have cells in that battery, and you have a lead, and you have sulfuric acid, and in that cell, it produces 2.2 volts. And so you put the cells in series, and you add them up, and you have either 6 volts or 12 volts, depending on the number of cells. So that electrolyte has a very low voltage level. And so what happens in the high school experiment when they show the electrolysis process, you put 2 carbon rods into the solution, and then you go over and you put a battery across those 2 carbon terminals, and possibly a switch, and then you put 2 inverted tubes, if you will, over those electrodes, and then turn the switch on, and then let the battery do its thing, and it'll create hydrogen on one carbon electrode, and it'll create oxygen on the other carbon electrode. And pretty soon, after watching it for a long time, you start to see the volume, and you start to see the ratio of 2 hydrogen to 1 oxygen. And you turn it off. And the chemistry teacher says, "Okay, guys, what do you see? Got the ratio?" And he says, "It takes more energy than you get anything out." And so every kid going through the chemistry class goes through that experiment. And then when you get into college, they redo the same experiment. And they tell you the same thing, you know?
So they're out to convince you that there's no point in pursuing. In fact, they call hydrogen an energy carrier for that reason. They refuse to call it a source of energy.
Well, the energy carried in the gases produced is it's known better today than it was back then. It's the emphasis, you know. Effectively, hydrogen, the hydrogen and oxygen, particularly the hydrogen will, when you produce it, you get about 3 watts per cc of storage in the hydrogen. And if you start, you know, multiplying that up to a kilogram and so forth, why, you can see that there's quite a bit of energy there that it will store. Now, the question is, how good is the storage? And one of the problems is that they're trying to solve right now on hydrogen storage on cars is that you can drive your car to work and keep it in the parking lot, and then when you come out after work, you find out that you lost some hydrogen. Hydrogen likes to wick its way through material, and it will deplete itself after a period of time. And
you know who first commented on that? The first reference that I could find in literature to that tendency to escape?
I don't know.
In my book, I mentioned this, is Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe? It probably did. You know?
Edgar Allan Poe wrote a story called The Balloon Hoax about a transatlantic crossing in what would have been a hydrogen balloon, only they used coal gas to fill the balloon. And the reason why, he says, is because hydrogen has a great tendency to escape.
Well, it does. I mean, it'll go, you can take, you know, even today, you can take a balloon and fill it up with helium and then watch watch it after a couple of days, and all of a sudden you'll notice that the balloon will change its height and start to go towards the Earth, and then eventually it will not